Okay, so I'm just going to read from the Autobiography of TAS2, my autobiography, and that's what this album is about, and some pretty crazy stuff in here, so I hope you enjoy it. But you can get this album from YouTube, and you can get the book online. This book will contain the factual autobiography of Ryan Gregory Thomas, who was chosen as the second Messiah or Christ, but who refused the task. For the protection of my identity, I hereby disassociate from all family members and disown them in a legal sense, entirely, as a means of not being connected to any financial gains or extortion attempts by the PLF, meaning they are not allowed to use my name in association with their lives, especially to express entitlement to any financial offers or valued donations related to my selection as TAS2. Anyone who has participated in the SMP2 or Christ system has done so of their own volition, including with the acceptance of whatever offers or powers have been granted. This complete disassociation is for their protection in a legal sense, as well as mine. Okay, I'm going to read Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 so that you guys can get a good breakdown of what happened in my life. Okay, so here's Chapter 5. I left the university in order to help take care of my little brother. He ended up at one of those San Diego hospitals and had to stay there for around a week. It looked as if he would go insane forever, which was due to the toxic substance that must have been ingested somehow. It was a very scary experience, as he'd never had any issues in life, at least none that I was ever aware of, having heard nothing bad in his past. Eventually he returned to his wits, which I want to say occurred within a month. So I returned back to my apartment at Adobe Falls Road near the San Diego State University campus, which had already been paid for up to the end of the month due to taking out student loans for such a reason. I wouldn't immediately need to get a job, so I spent the time working on my writing. I sent out more stories to be published and focused on development of my album, The Last No Needs LP, I think, working as an RWS tutor on campus off and on, and for those who signed up with me online through wiseant.com, as a means of gathering next month's rent. Then, it was around the end of March in 2010, I was accosted by the PLF, as I'd been when living out of my car in 2005. It was almost like receiving the Holy Spirit ACP again, but this time it didn't make any sense that there was such a heavy involvement in my daily life, causing me to struggle with sleeping and focusing on other issues. I actually took it as an ominous sign that I should continue my inquiry into the origin of life. I began researching electricity again, considering what could possibly be affecting me so much. Yet there wasn't any information that would be able to explain the bizarre situation. I had also submitted music with cursing in it to a pretty famous mixtape DJ, Green Lantern, and had been accepted for my song San Diego Anthem, which was on the aforementioned album. I paid the person somewhere around $400 for the inclusion, which I knew would boost my sales from around $100 a month to much more than that amount, enabling me to regain my financial losses from participating in the mixtape. However, something very weird happened. Anywhere from a few days to a week before April 10th, 2010, the amount of energy from the PLF was increased from that of the Holy Spirit ACP to something that I had never experienced prior, which was extremely weird. It kept sending me messages through nonverbal discourses and reinforcing particular perspectives with forced agreement with my ill body or spirit. See QRI, What is the Soul? It also didn't stop, continuing hour after hour with these nonverbal discourses and energetic transmissions. Much of it was concerning Christianity and belief in the Holy Spirit ACP, perspectives on life situations, almost like an interrogation about my character. Then, perhaps a day later, it began increasing the amount of energy that I was forced to match with my ill body, and the visuals became a lot more vivid at this point. I could begin to understand the interaction a little easier, even being asked what I thought about heaven and the fact my mother could still be alive. I'm certain it was a way of figuring out whether I could communicate some factual notion there were planets in the afterlife /LDEL in a reasonable fashion, but it wasn't anywhere near to that comprehension yet, with nobody on Earth having made these assertions in a scientific manner. So I just sort of took the spiritual stance and agreed that she could still be alive. Beyond that, the PLF began a particular spiel about random ideas, and it always made me envision whatever had been planned by showing its ill body to make the visual faintly appear with its own physical form of autonomous living energy, or ALE. One of the ideas was that of a hotel or building with a lot of rooms, which would be recurring for months, But this point of that imagery was mostly about vertical height of the building. It was trying to convince me that Jesus, or TAS1, was seen as being at the top floor, and the PLF could be the owner or manager of the entire facility. This was its first attempt at explaining population control to me, which it could have simply expressed as camcorder targeting, but for some reason it felt like making it more abstruse for the sake of fairness, as I would have been very famous if I were to figure out that there were planets in the afterlife that it was managing along with living populations on Earth. It kept showing me the image of the hotel and demonstrating various ways of communicating that I was at the bottom floor, most likely to indicate that the path ahead of me was going to be really tough, as some sort of significant messenger or holy figure. I hadn't yet figured out that I was going to be the second Christ messenger, which should be referred to as TAS2. On April 10th, 2010, the attacks were pretty severe and vivid. At one point, it literally sent the imagery that there were spikes in my ankles and made me feel as if I were tacked to a giant cross, exactly like TAS1, who'd failed to explain to people there were planets in the afterlife, and life continues on pretty much the same way. It was the first time that I realized my role in life was going to be somewhat like a messiah figure. I was being asked all these questions and had to answer them within a specific period of time, or there would be more attacks that felt very unpleasant. It was the first time that I noticed how energetic transmissions from the PLF could be extremely painful, sometimes worse than physical pain encountered due to damage of the physical body. It was really weird since there was nothing that I could do about it, also that it would disappear almost immediately after the life form was done with the attack. This was the case with the pretension of being nailed to a Roman cross for breaking the law. I can't recall how long that part lasted, but the torture with energetic transmissions lasted all day, and eventually, sometime in the afternoon, I was compelled to walk outside, which might have been a stupid maneuver. The attacks were pretty severe, and I was being guided more and more by the energetic transmissions. At one point, I reached a series of numbers outlined in boxes and was guided to walk across them. With each number, a different feeling accompanied the energetic discourse, which I couldn't really process logically, but when I reached the end of the row, looking much like squares for hopscotch, there was a weird feeling that swept over me. It was like I'd finished a milestone of some kind, but really, it was just time to go through my direct camcorder targeting. What likely happened was someone saw how weirdly I was behaving and had decided to contact the police. This meant that my actions would be captured with standard time documents, due to being contained in a police report of some kind. Almost immediately after turning the corner, which led to the way out of the apartment complex at Adobe Falls Road, I looked up at the sun and heard a communication effort that seemed to be asking whether I was ready to begin. I thought that it meant somehow I would die right there, but instead this massive shock occurred, as if the PLF had sent a transmission through sunlight into my body. It was definitely transmitting directly to my ill body, and after looking to the side, I saw two people sitting on the curb. For the first time in my life, I literally saw an ill body leap outside of the person's body, as if cheering for me somehow as the new Taz. However, I knew that it was just the PLF communicating with me for some particular assignment that had been given to me, and I still hadn't believed that it was directly related to my selection as a Christ figure. Soon afterward, the police showed up and started asking me questions. I told them that I had been drinking a little bit and was just experiencing some sort of a spiritual issue. The fact police had been included in the situation meant that we didn't have a way of documenting the occurrence, which as a writer I knew would be important later on. I decided to incorporate both the idea of mild intoxication, because the transmissions were so great that I would never pass for sober, and spirituality, so that if I needed to relate that I had been selected as some sort of messiah figure, it could be related in a realistic fashion, with an actual date that it all occurred and how insane such effects can make a person. The police didn't believe the spiritual aspect of it. Neither did they wish to allow me to return to my apartment, as I'd hoped for, just being slightly intoxicated. Instead, they hauled me away in a police car to the San Diego jail. It would be the only time in my life during which I would be arrested for anything, and I'd never had any sort of a criminal record, so I knew it wouldn't matter much vis-a-vis my credit as a law-abiding citizen. The entire time we left on the trip to the jailhouse, as if communicating a message about my personal life path, the hotel scenery kept appearing, but this time each room was being communicated as an atmospheric layer, as if the levels of floors reached to the heavens, each one symbolizing a higher state of awareness, but it was likely just a warning not to be discouraged, after taking a cheap shot, due to so much energy that overwhelmed my body and led to my first, i.e. and only, arrests, slightly tarnishing my record. I spent the night in the drunk tank, which was cold, made far colder by a specific type of the energetic transmissions, and annoying, because there were several people just waiting around. Luckily, nobody decided to use the toilet in front of everyone. There was also a phone, yet I was unable to contact my father to get me out of the facility. It was probably for the best, as the energetic transmissions would get a lot worse. At this point, I noticed the PLF was affecting other people, and they weren't even noticing the change in their energy levels. It was also the first time that I realized the PLF could engage in some pretty weird choreography by finding people who could fit into a particular environment and deal with its weird energy. Okay, now I'm also going to share Chapter 6 of the Autobiography of TAS2, which is available on Amazon.com. Chapter 6. I was released from jail on April 11, 2010, but it was only the beginning of a very long year of energetic transmissions and crazy torture with my ill body. It was a good thing that my rent was paid for the month. Otherwise, I might not have been able to avoid a center for rehabilitation or temporary insanity. In order to get out of the torture, at times I was being forced to spin so fast that I would throw up in my room. I had to outburst and make loud noises so that my embarrassment would be seen by my roommates. The PLF would also make the outside light appear like a brilliantly shining and beaming force outside of my window, threatening to obliterate me. I had to enact the part of a powerful messiah figure, a spiritual being capable of stopping the force from overthrowing me, which was enacted by the PLF, who was literally torturing my ill body. It was most likely figuring out how much energy I could summon and control with the ill body, so doing in the most unpleasant ways possible to also test my temperament along with my decision-making ability. The bizarre torture continued in a number of ways. At one point, I had to walk all night to deal with the extreme pressure of so much energy. It kept trying to make my heart explode, which required me to squeeze my fist and try to channel some of the energy into different parts of my body by focusing on other things. It also kept playing the same songs in my head, using this to indicate that the testing would continue in some of the worst ways, or get slightly better for a moment, and I knew that such torture would be helpful to humankind in the future. I was also out in the city by my apartment when the image of the self probe first appeared. See QRI, What is the Soul? Though at the time, having just encountered the first attempts at directly issued suggestions and warnings for a particular state of awareness, I had no clue how to consider such a thing as being an intelligible message. Later, a ball of energy became the first self-probe, which appeared to split into two snakes that started ravaging my body, which then turned into the Satan self, see synchronized living, one might say. And the devil would begin appearing in a new round of torturous tests or games that would affect my energy levels via the ill body. The Satan self appeared in a number of ways. Population control with a sort of Spanish Inquisition-like situation constantly occurred, with the PLF appearing as a body of energy concentrated in particular areas. For a time, I was just outside of the apartment complex while the PLF enacted the part of being a judge of my sins, as the devil kept arguing against me in a three-dimensional form, flying back and forth from the PLF and me. I could see it through the PLF's ill body, which is what I've termed the PLF's extended model, and where I got the term from initially. It was trying to prove that I was a bad person, but it was also the PLF trying to see if I wanted to enact the role of Satan. It kept trying to get me to inhabit the Satan self, pretending that I was going to do great harm to humanity as a warning about the Christ self. It is the same as any self-probe with suggestions and warnings that after going unheeded for too many awareness cycles then becomes the inhabitable self known as the operator at 1 Hertz, which allows the PLF to take over the physical body via the ill body. This would be a recurring theme many times throughout my life, with the Satan self being applied to me, but at this point it was usually appearing as a ghost in order to be a self-probe, recognizable with warnings and suggestions for me. The inquisition as to my sinfulness had concluded after a lengthy period of time, including no real results as to whether I had been found guilty. Back at the apartment, it would also appear in the mirror, one time as a growing tumor-like substance that began turning red on the right side of my head. The dimensionality associated with my face would also cause it to change shape during transfiguration, which is why eventually I stopped looking into mirrors altogether. Staying in my room mostly, I would go through a whole slew of different testing and analysis periods with lots of energetic transmissions. Everything had changed since that moment in which I had seen that bright light beaming toward me, witnessing an ill body leap out of a physical body, as I was clearly capable of seeing the ill body of the PLF, which was almost never a good thing, because it meant that I'd have to contend with lots of physical harm and sickness and insanity. It was testing my ability to deal with population control, which occurred in many different ways, including for a day or so, even when I was hanging out at the library with ghosts that would later be considered as the living cells during camcorder targeting testing analysis, or CTA, which can be reviewed by checking the book Autonomization Selves by QRI. The ghosts were in three-dimensional form and representing people, rather than just inside of my head as communication with verbal and nonverbal discourses. I could see these ghosts flying around the library with me, then later on in my room at my father's house, but these ghosts were visual projections of the PLF, using its ill body, which was proof that I could see its ill body to a certain extent. Later, I would call this the extended model, but with the PLF, unlike how I describe it in Autonomization Selves, it was an extension of the PLF's ill body because it doesn't have a physical body made of complex units, CUs, or atoms, which are about 10 to the negative 9 meters cubed in the HDL, e.g. planet Earth, and 10 to the negative 15 meters cubed in the LDL, IP1, which is heaven essentially with the singular life path. Its ill particles are much smaller at 10 to the negative 18 meters cubed, yet too small to notice with plain sight, so that it mostly just appears like energy and radiation until it begins to form shapes like human figures. Nobody can see the PLF's ill body unless it exposes itself to a person, but this likely never occurs except during the first stages of direct CT. Back at my room in Adobe Falls Road, the ghosts began attacking me with bats. I was doing pretty well fighting them off, as I could control my ill body and use it like my real appendages, killing the evil people that were trying to destroy me. However, it was about TA and trying to convince me that nobody could take on everybody, also that I would have to fail by demonstrating my ability to be non-violent. I let them win one of the rounds, then afterward I was directed to throw up in the toilet. When I returned to my room, the violent, demon-like people with the bats disappeared, so I could finally rest for a little bit. Apparently, the point had been made. I documented this particular event in my song, Blood Everywhere, which appeared on my album Miscellaneum, along with other moments of life that occurred around this scary time. There were also times when different rooms would be set up with different types of sinful or disgusting behavior, and I would have to deal with them sliming me, grossing me out, other times save them from being tortured by various demonic creatures. It was some of the most vivid imagery, as the room would be demonstrated by the parameters of my apartment. Though most of the time a setting could be changed without me leaving my room from PLF's ever-changing ale body. Other times, the atmosphere would appear like an oceanic scene, which required me to dive into the depths in order to rescue people that were drowning for some reason. The amount of time that I spent saving victims would be counted as efforts with population control, somehow a reflection of my willingness to go the extra mile in order to be seen as a good person. There were also episodes where dinosaurs would appear and other imagery as messages related to primordial times. The PLF was testing my understanding of pre-human history, possibly so that I could conduct research and investigate the possible origins of life. It was also a way of suggesting that dinosaurs were still around, though again I hadn't fully realized what the afterlife would be like, even less that it would be nearly the same in a lower density form due to a second Big Bang, which is now called a PEG, or particle explosion group. The smell of the room would resemble the Ca particles that emit from substances on IP 130,000, or around there. This is where life forms that are around 65 million years old can still be found, as each living being gets transported in the afterlife from one inhabited planet, or IP, to the next every 500 years. It would also imitate the states of awareness and general ambiance on planets where dinosaurs still exist, which can be reviewed by checking out the singular life path. See QRI, famous people you might see forever. Again, it was a way of testing how well I could explain the fact physical bodies are reconstituted by the PLF for life forms to exist in the LDEL. Also, the difference in cultures and life forms separated by inhabited planets, or IPs, by a difference of 500 years of ale maturation for each living population. Little did I know, It would take a lot of mathematics and scientific investigation to fully comprehend such matters and present them in a realistic fashion. The environment could be transformed simply by the PLF's L body and by enacting states of awareness, states of being, whenever considering life forms that it wished to convey, while at the same time making the general atmosphere resemble a particular environment from prehistory. Sometimes it would station large blobs of ale in the upper and lower corners of the room, then begin pretending to torture people, even women and children, within these blobs, and sometimes even more of them would appear, which was a burden, always forcing me to focus on them. It was very, very scary. Other times, it would appear that certain objects had spirits contained inside of them, and when I opened a container, a demon would fly out, then disturb me so that I couldn't concentrate on my daily activities. It was all part of the testing and analysis, but it was a period that I would consider distinguished as being able to see the PLF's extended model. The various tricks of imagery were too numerous to account for during this period, which can truly be considered the worst part of direct camcorder targeting. And even one of the energetic transmissions made it clear that being this affected by such attacks was due to improperness from being too close to the PLF states of awareness, as it really thought highly of itself. This notion would never change, but I would realize that the PLF is actually pretty darn stupid. In fact, one of its states of awareness was for presenting the TAS1 or Jesus self, which always acted like the Jesus from the Bible and would give the Holy Spirit ACP to heal sickness from the energetic transmissions. There was also the God self, which always attempted to lord over me and judge any thoughts that weren't in support of the PLF. One of the reasons that I made the decision not to support the PLF and charge it with crimes against me as well as humanity. I officially did just that in 2014 after it had blocked funds to starving children by getting people to stop supporting my music, including blocking people from believing in my ideas on planets in the afterlife and gravitational effects caused by displacement of energy bits. At any rate, there were a ton of attacks that it kept trying to use on me, including forming into blobs of ale and attacking me by wrapping up my ale body, forcing me to use the ale body to push the blobs off me. They were stupid and annoying, though sometimes it would use similar imagery, forming into stars that would burn my ale body to give me severe headaches, scorching my ale body to very severe pain that wouldn't even show up on my physical body. Unable to continue working at the EOP office as a tutor, I told them that I needed time off due to family problems, and I also returned to my father's house in the Costa where we used to live, before the recession caused them to accept forced retirement, which led to the sale of that home. While at my father's house, I went through a number of issues with direct camcorder targeting attacks. Sometimes the idea of heaven would occur, and all these ghosts as living selves and even celebrities would appear saying they were flying around because they had no place to go. The PLF signaled that heaven had been broken open so that all the spirits were flying around on Earth now. It was one of those tests that were due to the fact no one on Earth knew there were planets in heaven or /LDEL due to a second Big Bang. The PLF pretended as if it were extremely sad because it had to rebuild everything and required me to plan it all out with my mental capacity, giving me no other choice but to listen to the spirits and offer suggestions about how to deal with the various rooms set up by the PLF's L body, supposedly while it was at work rebuilding heaven. It kept pretending that it had lost its wits, requiring me to do all the thinking in order to organize the various spirits, getting them to behave in a manner that would make them happy. This was all because heaven was supposedly being rebuilt within the PLF's L body, so I figured we could only see it when we were all ghosts, and it was reconstructing everything. Obviously, it was just a way of testing my intelligence for the answers to the afterlife. My father noticed that I was pretty crazy almost immediately. My brother had been fixed by this point and suggested that I go in for treatment. We planned on a specific day, so I had a little bit of time. At night, I was accosted by the PLF the entire time, disallowing very good periods of sleep. I could see the imagery of several different alien civilizations that were competing with human beings, and it was suggested that everyone in the vacuum of space was in competition for the Messiah figures, making it up to me to defend humankind with my mental capacity. They, the ghostly figures, were living in the stars, taking up residence there as god figures and legendary figures who were heavenly spirits, representing the different earthly and alien species that were in a cosmic competition for various kinds of excellence, the starry homes being of disparate value. The different colored celestial objects depicted by the starry imagery could come alive, speaking to me like human beings, yet some of the unoccupied stars with different energetic compositions felt nice, like a soft coat. the occupied stars, proving some of them were male and others female. Yet they communicated like human beings with a variety of skill sets. Most importantly, the idea of living beings who died from different universes had been proposed, saying that our heavenly bodies were given to celestial objects, which is how we'd be preserved, evidently, throughout time. Meaning that when I died on Earth, that I would also be stored with my ill body in one of these celestial objects, yet mine was going to be of great value. It was a sad and crummy thing to think about, but the vividness of the communication efforts made it seem all possible. Yet then again, it was somewhat stupid, because after conducting mathematical reasoning a few years later, in reality, I found out there were just two Big Bangs, or PEGs, particle explosion groups, one of a lower density energy particle, which created smaller CUs or atoms to make planets, stars, etc., and that could be more easily used by the PLF for reconstituting the same physical bodies. So, it was all a giant ruse. Alright, that's it. You guys can go ahead and purchase this autobiography, my autobiography, on Amazon.com or on different websites. It's called The Autobiography of TAS2. It's the reason for this album, and I thank you all for listening. Bye.